I feel good. I feel good. How did it feel to walk on a piece of parking lot this morning? It will feel better to drive on it, I'll tell you that much. But it's pretty emotional, actually, to get out there and walk around. So as you leave the day, go ahead and take some time and walk all the way out there and lay down on it, do pavement angels or something. Just enjoy it. That's been a long time coming. And that right there was a giant that we had to slay. And by grace of God, we took it down. And so it's getting in there. It's coming quick. And it's very, very exciting to see what's going on. So before I get started, I've got a little announcement to make. I want you guys to take out your pens, pencils, crayons, markers, whatever you got on you. Your phone, take out your phone. Go ahead, I'll wait. Go ahead and take out your phone. And I want you to open up your calendar, and I want you to put in a date. The date is February 18th. February 18th is a Sunday. Very, very important date. On that date, we're going to be getting together here, obviously in the morning, but that evening at 6 o'clock, we're going to be having another meeting here, and I want all of you here in your seats. It'll be a packed house. Our president just gave his State of the Union address, in which he underscored all of the things that have been happening, what he's done, what he hasn't done, I guess, I don't know, whatever, and then what is going to happen, a vision for the future. So we're going to have on February 18th a State of the Church address. All right? And don't settle down. And we're gonna go over the last year and see what God has done in our church, and we're gonna see where we're at, what's going on, and more importantly, we're gonna see where we're going and what's going to happen. And believe me when I tell you that you don't want to miss this day. You don't want to miss this meeting, because you are going to hear things in this meeting that, let's just say, you don't want to miss. Okay? I don't want to give you too much, but it is so important that you're here, and we want to share with you some very, very, very exciting things that God is doing, some very, very, very exciting things that we're going to be facing in the near future. So be here February 18th, 6 o'clock. Don't miss it. I promise you. Move whatever you have in that evening. Go ahead and move it off your calendar. Clear it. Be here because you don't want to miss what's going to happen that night. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. So tell your neighbor, it's a big deal. And so you don't want to miss that. So be here for that, February 18th. Well, we are starting a new series this week called Slaying Giants. Slaying Giants. We kind of laid the groundwork for it last week, and we talked about the story that so many people know, the story of the spies going into the promised land. Moses sent them in to take a look around and give a report of what they found so that they could better prepare the children of Israel to enter the promised land. And when they came back, there were mixed reviews. 10 of the spies said one thing. Only 2 of them said that we could do it. The other 10 said, you know what? Yeah, it's true that there's milk and honey. It's true that there's abundance, but we can't do it. We can't do it because even though there is milk and honey and everything God promised is actually there's giants in the land. There's giants occupying the land that belongs to us. And so, like we talked about, the result is that the people of Israel collectively decided that, you know what? We're good. We're not going to take this land. We're not going to go into the promised land. We're not going to do it. And God promised it to us. I mean, it's ours. It belongs to us. But we're not going to do it. And only the 2 out of approximately, give or take, 2 million, only 2 had the courage and the faith to say, no, we can do this. We can do this. We can take this land. And what happened? What was the result? Do you remember? The result is that because of their lack of trust, because of their disobedience, because of their lack of faith in what God had given them and promised them, the result is they were not allowed to go into the promised land. None of them. Not a single person. Not a single person that was a part of that group that decided not to go in. Not a single one of them got to see and experience the promised land. They all died. And only those two, Caleb and Joshua, got to enter the promised land and experience the fullness and the abundance of God's blessing that he had planned and given to them. So none of them got to see it. Today I'm going to be talking about a giant. On our way into the promised land, if we're going to go into the place that God promised to us, if we're going to claim the land that God has promised to us, then there's going to be some giants occupying that land. And we're going to need to face these giants. We're going to need to take them on, confront them, and we're going to need to bring them down. We're going to need to slay some giants. And we finished up last week by saying if you're not willing to slay some giants, you're never going to be able to see the promised land. You got to be willing to slay some giants. And so our first giant that I think we need to take care of is one that's really kind of weird. It's kind of, well, let me just say this. Out of all of the giants, I have never, ever, until very recently, heard a message preached on this topic. The giant that I want to talk about today is the giant of greed. 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 And I know that this is totally relevant because everybody's looking at me like, greed? Okay, whatever. That's just not, it's not my thing, but I'm sure it's going to help somebody, so whatever. That's the reaction I had in the first service when I said the word greed. People were like, oh, just not angry, not upset, just passive, just not affected, right, by the topic. Show of hands. How many in here struggle with greed? Oh, we got some really honest people. In the first service, nobody would. Greed is something that not very many people admit to. I would venture to say this. In the 15 years that I've been here at New Dawn, and even beyond that, in years of ministry, and I grew up in church, but at least in the 15 years that I've been here at New Dawn, not one person has come to me for prayer or counseling, and many people have come to me for prayer or counseling over the years, but not one has ever come to me and said, Pastor, I need you to really pray for me. I am battling greed. Like in a big way. I am struggling with greed like you wouldn't believe. No one has ever said that to me. I've never heard it before. Why is that? One of two reasons. Either we are the most giving and generous church in the history of humanity, or there's something else going on. Because everybody would admit that greed is real. Everybody would say, oh, yeah, greed is real, and I'm sure there are greedy people, and we know maybe some greedy people, but it's not something usually that we will say, oh, man, I'm really feeling greedy. Or I'm just greedy. It's not something most people own up to. But at the same time, how is it possible? Because if everybody is so giving and so generous, there would be a much different outcome. So there's a catch, isn't there? Either we're so generous or this giant called greed is a little more tricky than he seems. Now, greed is a big, ugly giant, all right? He's nasty, but at the same time, greed has something that not a lot of other giants have. He has some capabilities, some superpowers that other giants don't have. I think greed may quite be the sneakiest, most subtle of all the giants that we might face. He's kind of a ninja giant. And he has the ability to sneak into situations, sneak into lives, sneak into circumstances without being detected. And even he disguises himself as so many different things. He has this ability to shape shift, if you will. And he will change his shape and form into so many different kinds of circumstances, situations, and you never know he's there. You never know. And you could be living with this giant for years and never even know it. Matter of fact, you could be battling this giant and think that you are generous. You could believe that about you, while at the same time, this giant has got his foot on your head. That's the ability that this giant has to attack and confront us. And greed is one of the giants that is going to keep us from entering the promised land. Greed is one of the giants that's going to keep you from reaching the place that God has promised you. Let's go back and let's reread that passage that we started with last week in the Numbers. So go back to the book of Numbers. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, chapter 13. Let's read, starting in verse 26. It says this. They came back to Moses. This is the spies that's telling about their report. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses an account. We went into the land which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is the fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev. The Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Mosquitobites live in the hills. And the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. Then Caleb shushed everybody and said, y'all listen up. We should go up and take possession of this land, for we can certainly do it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. And they spread among the people, or the Israelites, a bad report about the land that they had explored. They said, the land which we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw were of great size. We saw the Nephilim. We saw giants, they said. The descendants of Anak. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. And we looked the same to them. So let's talk about this giant. Greed. Greed. No one admits to it mostly. I've been proven wrong in this service, so thank you very much for calling me out on that. But it's something that we all know is there, yet none of us mostly think that we struggle with it. As a matter of fact, when I first started deciding to talk about this giant, the thought came to me, well, I mean, how much could I really say? I don't have a lot of experience with greed, right? I don't really struggle with it. And I caught myself going, wait, hold up. I see what's going on. Even within myself, I had to call it out. I mean, like, okay, all right, I think that I'm generous. I believe that I'm a generous person. But yet, I know that I don't give all that I could give. You with me? I know, if I'm going to be honest with myself, I know I could probably do more. I could probably give more. But at the same time, I don't feel I struggle with greed. You see the disconnect? This giant is sneaky, and he's subtle, and he has the ability to shapeshift and sneak into your life without you even knowing he's ever there. So we're going to call him out today. We're going to shine some light on this giant, see if we can expose him so that we can learn how to fight him and bring him down. You with me? Say, oh yeah. Verse 27 says, they give an account to Moses, says, we went to the land which you sent us, and it actually does flow milk and honey. Remember last week we talked about this phrase, flow milk and honey. It does actually mean there's a river of milk and like a waterfall of honey flowing through this, which would be awesome, by the way. But that's not what he's talking about. What is he talking about? He's talking about how if there's milk, it means there's livestock, there's cattle. If there's cattle, it means there's fertile fields. And it means there's a fertile field. That means the land is rich with nutrients and there's water to irrigate it and so on and so forth. So what it represents is he's saying not only is there milk there, which means there's some cows, he says it flows with milk. And how much milk does it take to flow? I mean, just like a rushing river that would take a lot of cows. So what he's saying is it flows with milk and honey. Doesn't mean there's just milk and honey. It means there is an abundance of riches. There's an abundance of this. It is a rich and abundant land, this land that God has given us. It's rich. It's abundant. There's more abundance in this land than you can imagine. As a matter of fact, when you think of it, not one of these Israelites, not one of them except for maybe Moses, who grew up in the royal palace of Pharaoh, the Israelites had no idea, no concept of what that meant when they said this land is abundant and flows with milk and honey. They had nothing to compare that to. You see, they had come out of hundreds of years of slavery in Egypt, remember? And life of slavery is not a life of abundance, is it? It's a life of wants, it's a life of need, it's a life of scarcity. It's a life of always trying to keep your head above water. Oppression. For hundreds of years, generation over generation after generation lived in slavery. And so they come out finally, are liberated from Egypt out of slavery. They go into the desert following Moses, following God, and they come with that mindset of slavery. All of a sudden, God starts providing for them manna. And they start experiencing manna, the provision of God, which still was in abundance. It was enough, right? God's provision is always enough, and God always promises that you will have enough. You will not go hungry. That is His promise. But it was not a life of abundance. It was a life of depending on God for having enough. Now, what happens after a time of God providing and you depending on God? After a time, what comes out of a life, a mentality of dependency on God can very quickly turn into a mentality of laziness. Because think about it, they did not have to work for the manna. They just walked out and picked it up off the ground every day. Right? They didn't have to grow it, to sow it, to harvest it. It was just there. God just gave it to them. God provided it. They start getting accustomed to that process. They start getting used to it, taking it for granted even, and complaining about it if you read some passages. Like at some point, the miracle of God giving you manna, you're going, oh man, manna again? I could have like some ham and cheese to go in it. I don't know. Do we have a Cuban press? Maybe we can make a cubano or something, like some pickles and mustard on the manna. I don't know. I mean, like they started complaining. Where's some meat? We need meat. They complained about the manna, which leads me to believe that the mentality of being provided for shifted to a mentality of laziness. And I'm going to call that the mentality of manna, the manna mentality, a mentality of scarcity, a mentality of laziness. Now, do not for a second confuse laziness with contentment. They are not the same. They are totally different. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about being content, right? Being content does not equal being lazy. The Israelites were living with a manna mentality, which said, we don't have to do anything, and this just shows up. It just happens. It's like, well, I'm not going to use that term. But as a matter of fact, I'm going to skip that whole section. I thought I had this process happening. I'm going to skip that. You don't need to hear what I had to say, what was going on in my head, because it's irrelevant, and I don't want to offend anybody. I'm just thinking out loud. I better not get in trouble. It's like depending on somebody, and at first you're so grateful and so thankful because you have enough. You can eat and you can survive and you can live. But after a while, that generosity from that person, all of a sudden you don't feel that grateful anymore. You almost feel entitled after a time, right? You expect it. You expect God to do it, expect that person to keep providing, yet you've done nothing to work for it. You've done nothing to earn it, to gain it, but you live off of it, and you start depending on it, and it develops a lifestyle of entitlement and of laziness and a manna mentality. The Israelites have a manna mentality at this point, a mentality of scarcity and laziness. And so none of them, when they hear the words, a land so rich, it flows with milk and honey, none of them know what to compare that to, because none of them have ever seen anything like that, let alone experienced it. They have no idea. Only the spies that saw it with their own eyes. And so the people are thinking, all right, so it's abundance. Right, it's abundance. And we've never lived abundance, so I can't speak from experience, but I'm just going to say that I don't know that abundance is worth facing a giant for when we have enough with the manna. You see what I'm saying? Like, the manna is enough. It's enough to survive on. Like, manna's enough. We can eat, we can live. Yeah, it's enough, but God is promising milk and honey. Don't settle for manna when there's milk and honey on the menu. I think that many of us in church today are living with a manna mentality when God is promising milk and honey. And we see God's provision. And at one point it was miraculous, and we were so thankful that God, and we're living off of it, and God can, and we're comfortable. There we've decided, we've realized that we can survive. When God's going, no, wait, what are you doing? I've got more. There's way, way more. Don't settle for just this because it's easy. I've got milk and honey. I've got abundance. They had a manna mentality. There's some generous people in our church, some generous people that will never see the promised land because they're living with a manna mentality. It's time to change our mindset, isn't it? I don't know about you. I want more. I want the fullness of God's abundance for my life, for my family, for my church. I want to see the milk and honey. I don't want to get caught in a manna mentality. I don't want to be comfortable with God's provision when He's offering me His abundance. And that's where the Israelites were, settling for manna. So what does this have to do with greed? How does this tie in? How does this giant of greed manage to slip his way into this circumstances? And what does it have to do with the manna mentality? How does he accomplish it? How does he manage to keep us from God's blessing? How does this giant manage to get in our way and prevent us from seeing God's abundance? I'm going to tell you how he does it. And then I'm going to explain it. I'm going to explain it. Is what I just said. Did you catch that? I'm going to explain it. You know how he does it? He does it through fear. Fear. Fear is the tool. Fear is the mechanics. Fear is the weapons that this giant uses to keep you out of the promised land. Fear. Fear. Let me see if we can explain this a little bit better. Verse 31 says this, but the men who had gone with him, with Caleb, said, no, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report. When it says a bad report, it means bogus. It means they made stuff up to make it seem worse than it really was. They spread a bad report and said, the land we explored devours those living in it. Yeah, really? Okay. So how are there still people there? Just saying. No one asked that question? All the people we saw there were great size. They were giants. These dudes were afraid. They were afraid. And fear led them to be okay with a manna mentality. Fear led them to settle for God's provision when God is trying to give them his abundance. Fear. The giant slips in and causes you to fear. And he starts saying stuff to you. Remember, a giant is a relative term. The term giant is only relative to what you put next to it. A giant is only a giant when it's standing next to something that's small. But when you put something that's bigger than the giant, all of a sudden your giant ceases to be a giant, remember? It is all about perspective. It's all about perspective. This giant named greed slips in there, sneaks his way in. He says stuff. He starts talking. He starts saying things like, you know what? You really can't afford to tithe. You really can't. I know you'd love to tithe. You want to, but right now you're in a season of scarcity, and you just don't have it. You don't make enough money to tithe just yet. Or he'll say stuff like, you know what? I know you want to give generously, but it's just not the right time. You need to build up your savings a little bit more. Now listen, building up savings is wise, it's smart, and it's godly. I'm not against that. But I need you to pay attention and listen to the lies that the giant is telling you. He says you can't afford it just yet. Wait till you accumulate a little bit more. When you have a little bit more, you'll be able to give generously. But you're just not yet. You're not there yet. You just can't afford to give away a car right now. That's insane. You can't give an offering above and beyond your tithe right now. What if your car breaks down? Well, what if your roof leaks? What if you have medical bills unexpectedly and then what? And all of a sudden, we start giving into the logic of fear. And that giant has been able to sneak his way in and stop you through fear. Through fear. We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes. In our own eyes. Now, I've seen some tall people in my life. Every time I see Stephen, I get up on a chair to give him a big fat hug. He gives the best hugs, by the way. The best bear hugger in the world. But Stephen is 6'6", if I'm not mistaken. 6'6", same height as Michael Jordan. And that's pretty tall. I'm 6 foot and then some, but that's tall. And I've seen some people that are way taller than that. I have friends who are 6'9". And the Bible is full of giants. And the most famous one, what's his name? You remember? Goliath. Now, Goliath was, see if you remember the Sunday school story. How tall was Goliath? 9 feet. 9 feet. Not quite 3 meters. Now, 9 feet is a foot less than a basketball goal, and that is just stinking tall. You know what I mean? I mean, if NBA could have drafted a Philistine, they'd be in business. I mean, he could just look up into the... That's crazy. That is tall. That is a big dude. 9 feet tall. And he wasn't alone. There was a whole race of giants. He had 5 brothers himself, Goliath, and they were all just as big as he was. Now, 9 feet is tall for a human. But let's be real. Standing next to a person who's 9 feet tall does not make you look like a grasshopper. You see what I'm saying? Do you notice the exaggeration that these guys implemented? The drama that how they spun this to justify their own fear? The fear does that to us, doesn't it? It makes us exaggerate the size of the enemy, the size of the giant, so that our fears may be somehow justified. We do that when it comes to greed, when it comes to giving. We exaggerate the size of the giant in order to justify our fear. And you can afford to tithe. Man, if you start tithing, then you won't have enough for the end of the month. Oh, we're going to run out of money. You're going to starve. Your kids will die. Man, you're going to have to, oh my God, that giant is huge. And you just made up this whole lie about the size of that giant to justify your fear. That's what these guys did. That's a manna mentality. It's a scarcity mentality. Once they saw themselves as small, they convinced themselves that they couldn't win. You catch that? Once they saw themselves as being small, they convinced themselves that it was impossible to win. It's all about perspective. It's all about perspective. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to jump right in, and I'm going to give you 3 things that you need to know when you face your giant. Okay? 3 things you need to know when you face your giant. 3 things we're going to do today. Number 1, first we're going to see the giant. You got to see the giant for what it really is. Not what you imagine it is, not what you embellish that it is. You have to see the giant for what it actually is. In reality, be honest about what the giant is. And you need to admit what the giant is to yourself. Be honest about it. Because when we are afraid, our tendency is to embellish what it is we're afraid of, so that our fear is justified. But you've got to be honest about what the giant, you've got to see it for what it is. Turn with me to the New Testament, and let's read a passage in 2 Timothy chapter 6. And Paul is speaking these words to Timothy. And Timothy is going to a city that is filled with rich, retired Roman generals. A city of wealth and riches. And Paul is writing this to Timothy, who's taking this word back to a church in that city. And he says this in chapter 6, verse 6. He says, "But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction." Now, let me clarify real quick. When it says those who want to get rich, what Paul is describing, what he's trying to say there is this: those who pursue riches, those who cater their lifestyle around achieving wealth. Understand what he's saying here, all right? Those who live for money is what he's talking about. will fall into temptation and a trap into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. The love of money is the root of all evil. Not money. Not wrong to have money. It's not right to have money. Money is amoral. It's neither wrong or right? It's not bad to have money. The problem starts when money has you. When money and accumulating money drives your life, that's where it starts getting tricky. That's where it starts getting tricky. Not money, the love of money. Money is a tool. Money is a means to an end. Money is a blessing. Let me just go ahead and put this out. I didn't say this in the first service. It came to me later. But let me just tell you that making money, the ability to make money, is a gift that not everybody has. I believe it is a gift from God. And some people have this gift to easily make money. They do. And I believe it's a gift from God. So it's a gift from God like playing an instrument or being able to speak or being able to do any number of things that God has gifted you with. The ability to make money for some is a gift. Everybody's going, dang, why didn't I get that gift? Right? I know. But none of you start with greed, I'm sure. I caught you. It's a gift. Why shouldn't you, if you have the gift of making money, why shouldn't you give that gift to God and use it for His kingdom and His glory? We expect that, we would like for people to have the gift of music to use it for His glory. You have the gift of helping kids, use that. The gift of management, the gift of administration, the gift. Why not the gift of making money? It's a gift. Some people have that gift. You should use your gifts for expanding the kingdom of God. Absolutely. And I believe that wholeheartedly. Don't hold back. So I won't hold back in asking you, if you have that gift, if you have that ease of making money and that just comes natural to you, you have a giftedness for it, you should be using that to grow the kingdom of God, straight up. Some people give other things, you give money. Some people have the capability, the ability to right now write a check for $1 million without breaking a sweat. And that's just their life. Some people, if they give $10, their ability to eat is in question. So it's not about equal amounts, you understand? It's equal sacrifice. That was for free. It's not on my notes, so I think I lost myself here. Okay, where are we at? Money does not bring happiness. Money just doesn't bring happiness. It brings a lot of things, but not happiness. So there's basically two ways to look at money. There's basically two ways to see your money. Number one, you can see your money, you can look at your money through the lens of fear. When you look at your money and see it through the lens of fear, the result is always the same. It will always result in greed. When your approach to money is an approach of fear, the result will always be greed. You will always have that manna mentality. What do I mean by that? When you approach money through the lens of fear, when you start to believe the lies of the giant of greed and the lies he says, listen, I can't afford to tithe right now. I can't afford to tithe right now. But when I start making some more money and I get in a better situation, I will absolutely, I'm so excited about it actually, now that you mention it, because I really am looking forward to tithing. I've heard good things about it. I'm not there yet, but when I get there, when I start making some more money, I'm totally going to do it. It's going to be awesome. Man, I can't give generously just yet because I'm going through a season right now. It's just things are tough. So when I build up my reserves a little bit, as soon as I'm rich, I'm totally First thing I'm going to do when I'm rich is give generously. That's the first thing on my list. Once I get rich, once I hit it and I get to where I need to be, first thing on my list is give generously. And you start to believe those lies, that is a manna mentality. It's a mentality of scarcity. Why? Because you are living with the fear of not having enough. And you will justify it to yourself because you'll embellish and you'll exaggerate the size of that giant, won't you? Absolutely we will, and we do. That giant's too big, but when I get a little bit bigger, I'll be able to kick his tail. When I make more money, I'll start tithing. When I get rich and I have enough, I will absolutely give generously. It's just right now, it's a bad time. Both of those scenarios are seen through the lens of fear. Fear of not having enough money. Fear of not being able to make it. Fear of going without. It's fear. It's fear. And not to contradict Master Yoda, but fear doesn't lead to the dark side. Fear with money leads to greed. What happens? Why? Because here's what happens. Listen, pay attention. Lean in a little bit. Let me know you're listening. Okay. Nobody leaned in. Whenever you start believing the lie that you don't have enough to tithe, or you don't have enough, you're not rich enough to be generous, what happens? You start working to have more. And you will work to have more, to get paid better. And you will accumulate. You work to accumulate wealth. You work to accumulate riches. Well, guess what's going to happen eventually? I'm glad to inform you, you are absolutely going to accomplish it. You set out to make more money, guess what's going to happen? You are totally going to make more money. You will. You'll get there. You want to accumulate riches? You can do it. You will get there. But here's the problem. Because you did it with a manna mentality, a mentality of scarcity, that position, that day, never comes. Because you know just as well as I do that as soon as I make some more money, my posture changes, doesn't it? The line gets stretched a little further along, doesn't it? My lifestyle expands, and so I'm still not in a position where I can tithe. Now I'm making a lot more money now. A few years later, and I put in the work, I've done the job, I've got rewarded. I'm making some more money, but man, I'm just still not in a place where I'm comfortable tithing. Because I've stretched my margins, and man, this is my lifestyle. I just don't have enough to tithe. And the fact is that when we decide, hey, when I get rich, I'll give generously. The problem is what? That when you accumulate enough money that would mean that you were rich before, all of a sudden now the term rich means something else. You never get there, do you? Because you will never have enough. You will never have enough. You can accumulate when you were 18, what you thought was rich. And when you get there, you're looking back going, it really wasn't that much. Now rich means this. So your perspective doesn't change. Your mentality of scarcity, your manna mentality doesn't change, does it? And you are still under the control of greed. That giant that somehow managed to sneak his way into my life and is keeping you and I from stepping foot into the promised land of God's abundance. Because we live with a manna mentality. I think it's probably a good time for a lot of us here to change our perspective, to change our mentality from a manna mentality to a milk and honey mentality, to a mentality of abundance. The other way to look at your money is this. You can see it through a lens of fear or a lens of faith. When you see through a lens of fear, what is the result? Greed. When you see it through a lens of faith, the result will always be generosity. Always. Always be generosity. That mindset, that lens, that perspective, that's a Caleb and Joshua perspective. That's a perspective of the 2 spies against the 2 million. The 2 that said, you know what? I don't have anything in my hands that would logically tell me that I can take those giants. I don't own anything that would say to me or anybody else, I've got the skill set, the equipment, and the preparation to go take those giants. But guess what? I think we're going to take those giants anyway. By faith. Faith in what? Faith in who? Faith in the one who called them to that land. Faith in the one who promised that land. And faith in the one who had already given it to them. God never breaks a promise, regardless of your ability to achieve it. That was good. I'm going to say it again. God never breaks His promise, regardless of your ability to reach that promise. See, it doesn't depend on you and your ability to accomplish it. If God said it's yours, go get it. Stop living in the desert. Claim what He's promised you. Stop living off of manna and being content with manna when God has promised you abundance and milk and honey. Start seeing your financial situation through the lens of faith. You know what? I can't afford to tithe. You know what? I can't afford not to tithe. Because it boils down to this. It boils down to trusting God more than your own ability. That's the real question when it comes to tithing. Do I trust God and His Word more than I trust my own ability to manage that 10%? Do I trust that God is going to take that 10% and give me His abundance? Nah, I'd rather trust myself with that 10% and see what I can do with it. Do you see what's going on? So you got to make a decision. Are you going to give in to this giant and start trusting in your own ability? Or are you going to see it through the lens of faith and trust what God said? We should take that land, is what Caleb said. We should take it. Number 2. We got to see the giant first, and then we got to slay the giant. We got to slay the giant. Giant's got to come down. I slay all day. Let's see what Paul says again in the same passage, a few verses down. It's 1 Timothy 6. He kind of wraps it up. And listen to what he says. I love this. Verse 17, he says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God. Listen to this. Who richly provides us with everything. With what? With everything. In Spanish, the version says, He provides us with abundance. With abundance. For what? Wait, what? Don't put your hope in wealth, which is uncertain. Put your hope in God, who richly provides in abundance for our enjoyment. So what is it that you think you can accomplish by your own pursuing wealth? That verse right there is exactly what you were after, isn't it? Right? I mean, isn't that what you want out of wealth? You want abundance to be able to enjoy it? Maybe you never read the verse where God said, I actually want you to be blessed in abundance so that you can enjoy it. You just skipped the point. You said, all God wants is to give, right? We want to give generously, but I don't know. And Paul is saying, no. You got the wrong picture here. God ain't broke. Put your hope in Him who gives richly in abundance for your enjoyment. In this way, command them to do good and be rich in good deeds and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. God doesn't just want you to survive. You understand what I'm saying? He wants you to thrive. He wants you to live life, and life to its fullest. Abundant. Don't settle for manna. Don't give in to the giant of greed. Don't live with a mentality of scarcity when God promises milk and honey. If you're willing to slay some giants and you're willing to go against the logic of this world, which obviously, if you've been in the rat race long enough, you will know that the logic of this world is a hit or miss, isn't it? It's uncertain. And you might accumulate wealth, but you got to give up a lot to do it. So why don't we actually trust the one who promised the abundance for once? Stop pretending like we're going to accumulate enough manna to make us happy. God promises abundance. We're going to slay this giant. So how do you stop the giant from growing? How do you kill a giant? Stop feeding it. Stop feeding it. So we slay the giant by giving generously. How do you destroy greed? How do you counter greed? How do you squash greed in your life? You give. Is that what you wanted to hear? Probably not. But it's a giant we need to slay if we want to see the promised land. And I don't mean figuratively, guys. I don't mean give your money and you gotta tolerate being poor because you gave all your money to the church and that's just the way God wants it. No! Oh my Lord, no. Don't you understand? God wants to bless you more so that you can give more. He wants to give you abundance so that you can give in abundance. He wants you to have abundance to enjoy so that you can enjoy being generous. Receive open-handed. Don't clench it when God gives it. Don't hold it. Don't keep it. If God gives it, receive with open hands so that you can give and He can give more. Because let me tell you this, and my daddy taught me this since I was little, you can never outgive God. The more you give, the more He gives. The more you give, the more He gives. You will never give more than He gives. So give. So we don't just want to slay the giant. We want to see him. We want to slay him. The last thing we want to do is, you got to slay the giant, but it doesn't do any good because if you don't maintain that, the giant's going to do what? He's going to get back up and come after you again, isn't he? So we want to see him. We want to slay him. We want to stay free from this giant. How do we stay free from this giant? First of all, put money in its proper context. And here's how we're going to stay free from this giant. Now, a little disclaimer here. I love you. I love you with all my heart. I mean that. You are very dear to me. I care for you. I want nothing more than to see God bless you and your life and your family. But I've got to say this. And we've got to stand by it. I'm just going to put it out there. So, some of you are giving generously. You're tithing faithfully. And you're seeing what I'm talking about. You've experienced that blessing. You've experienced some of that abundance. But some of us, it's been a long time since you've given anything. Some of you have never actually tithed. What do I mean by tithe? Well, tithe is the example of giving that we have in Scripture. It predates the New Testament. It predates the Old Testament all the way from Abraham. Giving 10% of what you receive, 10% of your earnings, back to God. That's tithing. And some of you have never actually done that at all. Every now and then you'll remember, you'll do it. Every now and then you'll get a bonus, you'll throw something in there. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about throwing something in the plate to ease your conscience. Now, if this isn't you, then that's fine. I'm not talking to you, but I need you to understand, with all love and care that I have for you, I want God to bless your life. And it has to start there. Tithing is not generosity. You understand? Tithing is not giving generously. Tithing is obedience. I can't say, hey, I'm tithing. I'm tithing, so I'm being generous. You know, I'm totally giving. I pat myself on the back because I'm tithing consistently. No. Tithing is obedience. That's where it starts. And so if you want to slay this giant in your life, and you want to begin to experience some of the abundance that God has promised, you got to start here. You got to start here. Tithing is just obedience for the family of God. If you're a Christian, it's the bare minimum to give 10% of your income. Not because you have to, but because you get to. Not because God will strike you with a bolt of lightning, simply because if you don't, you just won't experience the fullness of God's abundance and blessings in your life. It's that simple. But it's not generosity, it's obedience. And I would have to say that many of us have been living in disobedience. And then wondering why we can't experience God's blessing. Man, I don't know why all these things are coming due at the same time. Why is this car breaking down? Why is this happening? Why can't I make it? Why can't I make ends meet? I ran out of the month way before the money right before the month. I don't know what's going on in the whole time. You've never tithed at all, and you've never been obedient with that first, basic, simple, crucial step into experiencing God's blessing. This principle alone would transform your life. This principle alone, if you start living with seeing your money through the lens of faith and start being obedient with this basic step, your world will turn around. I don't promise it. God promises it. It's His promise. And it starts there. Generosity starts after obedience. Generosity starts above and beyond that. Well, Pastor, how much should I give? How much should I be generous? Well, how much do you want God to bless you? It starts here. Don't expect to ever see the promised land of God's abundance while living in direct disobedience to what He's saying. You got to see it through the lens of faith. And that's not easy. Because stepping into the promised land is going to demand that you slay these giants. It's going to demand that you have to fight. It's going to demand some struggle. But the abundance of the land of milk and honey is so worth slaying the giant of greed. It's so worth being willing to fight, being willing to have that faith. and trust God with the basics of obedience. And for some of you, that's where you're at. You haven't been consistent with it, or you've never done it, and that's where you got to start. You've got to start trusting God for the basics. Yeah, everybody's on board when I say, who wants to go to the promised land? Yeah, who wants to tithe? Hey. I don't know that the promised land is worth it. You see how all of a sudden your default is to have a manna mentality? Yeah, but I can't afford. All of a sudden your default reaction is to have a scarcity mentality. Well, you got to tithe, but I literally can't afford. All of a sudden, you still see your giant through lens of fear and not faith. As if God doesn't know your situation. As if God doesn't know the size of your giant. Invite God to stand next to your giant and then see what happens. Shift your perspective. See it through the lens of faith and watch what God can do. You want to see the promised land? It's time to slay this giant, church. You want to see the blessings and abundance of God in your life? Let's slay this giant. Take one step. Let's pray together.